Hello and welcome to Murder with Friends, the show where friends get together and talk about the darker sides of history. I'm your host, Grace Baldridge, and today we have another Campfire Edition episode for you. I'm joined by my co-creator, Amir Nakui, Mary Ignatova, who is a director and camera operator editor at TYT, and Jack Ruley. Welcome back for season 2. You guys may remember Jack from Charles Manson, and we talked about Jonestown. I think you've done a Campfire as well, maybe?
I haven't. This is my first Campfire.
So this is your first time. So now, just to explain a little bit about how a Campfire works is basically there's a theme for the episode and each person will present a different topic that relates to that theme. Now the theme that we have chosen is a particularly grim one, so I know that we say viewer discretion is advised, but for this series of episodes I really do mean that more than most, because we're talking about the atrocities of war. And the topic that I've chosen to bring to the table is Camp Sumter. It was a prison camp during the Civil War in Andersonville, Georgia. And my brother has actually put together a small package with the help of our editors to tell you a little bit about what I'm going to be presenting today. Let's take a look.
Camp Sumter, located outside Andersonville, Georgia, was one of 150 Union and Confederate prison camps during the American Civil War. Named after the same Revolutionary War hero for whom Fort Sumter is named, Camp Sumter first received prisoners in February 1864. For the next 14 months, 45,000 Union troops were held there, with over 13,000 dying of disease, poor sanitation, malnutrition, overcrowding, or exposure. In June 1864, over 26,000 Union troops were held in an open pen that was built for only 10,000 prisoners. There was a line drawn inside the pen where the prisoners were kept, and if they crossed this dead line, they would be shot by guards along the walls of the prison camp. The lack of shelter made it necessary for prisoners to erect crude shanty towns inside the pen that were often not enough to resist the cold winters and hot summers. Camp Sumter basically was a cross between Lord of the Flies and a concentration camp. The poor conditions that the Union prisoners had to endure led to the creation of a group of prisoners called the Andersonville Raiders. These were a group of around 100 Union prisoners led by 6 men who would plunder and steal from other prisoners to better their own situation. This led to the formation of subgroups of prisoners who would protect themselves from the raiders until the Confederate captain of the camp initiated a crackdown on the raiders. Due to the abysmal state that the camp was kept in, Captain Wirz, the Confederate commander of the camp, was tried for war crimes in late 1865 and hung in November of that year.
Something that's particularly troubling about Camp Sumter was that there usually was a prison exchange. So when they built Camp Sumter, they thought, okay, this will house 10,000 men and we'll have an exchange between the Union and the Confederate prisoners of, so we'll make sure that this will never get too out of hand. But the Union had actually stopped this prisoner exchange, and when they sent prisoners from Camp Sumter to go plead like, hey, can we get this exchange back? Things are deteriorating rapidly here. They said, no, we're not. Like, this was basically sort of a way of the Union smoking out the Confederate in many ways, so things got incredibly dire. Just we're not going to help you. This prison situation that you have is your problem. We're not going to deal with this. And it got to the point where they would even allow local women and even children to come and gawk from some of the high up places at the prisoners, just to see, oh my gosh, look at how bad things are at Camp Sumter. This to me makes me think about what happens to our humanity when we are put in isolated situations like this. It ended up being actually, I believe, the 5th largest city in the Confederacy during the time that it was, that it was in operation.
Wow.
Think about that, and think about how they tried to band together and form a society. It makes you wonder, what would you do put in that situation? What would you do to survive?
I think it's survival of the fittest at that point. Your day-to-day is, how am I gonna live until the night? What am I gonna do? And like from there, it just devolves into the worst kinds of human behavior.
Do you think that when they put a prison camp like this together, that they genuinely thought, they built it next to a railroad and to a water source? So when the plans were initially drawn up, they did intend for Camp Sumter to be a functioning prison camp that would have prisoner exchanges. Do you think that they could have ever predicted that it would devolve in the way that it did within such a short span of time, 14 months? They didn't even have time to put up structures. People were literally living in blankets and makeshift lumber that they found.
It's a really intense thing to look at the last year of the Civil War and the last 2 years of the Civil War, especially in the South, where, you know, as you start losing a war, it becomes, for the losing side, total war. You have to put everything in, or else God knows what the repercussions are going to be like. You know, we didn't know that there was going to be Reconstruction. After the burning of Atlanta, a lot of people in the South were like, if we lose this, we're done. Everyone is going to be killed. Everyone is going to be destroyed. Every town is going to be taken over. And so trying to have a prison camp like this, where you're like, all right, we're going to exchange prisoners, you see the breakdown of the, like, quote unquote, pun not intended, the civility of war.
Right.
And it's very hard, I think, to say, oh, we're going to feed these prisoners, but like your kid is severely malnourished because of this war.
So when we talk about the atrocities of war, something that has been a reoccurring theme to me is how outsiders, civilians, respond to this. And something that I thought was so unsettling is hearing about women and children that would go up the 17-foot high walls to these little perches, they would call them little pigeon perches, where the guards stood, and just gawk at the prisoners. Now, some of them would respond by bringing in food, you know, in the coming days after that, trying to nourish these prisoners who were so obviously just dying of you know, dysentery, of just infection, diarrhea, killing each other off, just awful deaths. And then you have people that come to gawk that are not at all involved in it. They don't have to go. No one's paying them to go. Why, Mary, do you think that people do that? Why? What's the incentive? Why do you go look at prisoners?
I think maybe they felt the prisoners as separate from them, because they're like kind of different kinds of people and they're not them. So I think for them, they didn't feel like they're humans as they are.
It's an interesting point, because there was no like massive media back then to like tell people like the other is bad or whatever. So how did this information get disseminated out to the common people?
And maybe people didn't
to kind of like
believe that it was as bad as it was.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean,
we had human zoos at the time. Like literally, we would build like structure, like build like a fake little area, and you would go and see like a pygmy. Like our understanding of like anyone that's not you or anyone that's not us is so new, where it's like, oh, like we should care about people that are outside of our group, and especially in the South, where it's like, those are Yankees.
Yeah.
Like, you know why your dad is dead? Is those men.
Right.
You know why Uncle so-and-so got scarlet fever or dysentery and died in a pit? Is those men. And so I think it's we think of it as other Americans, but that really wasn't the thought process at the time. We were not there's a great quote of it's the United States are versus the United States is. And this is very much the North and the South were others. So it is that kind of mentality of this isn't our guys.
Yeah.
And I think what is also interesting about Camp Sumter, and I suppose in a sense encouraging about the human condition, is that when put into these awful conditions, where if you crossed a certain line, it was called the deadline, you'd just be shot dead right there. And a lot of people would sometimes choose to end their lives because it was awful by crossing that deadline. And there were prisoners that escaped. There were tunnels that were disguised as wells. But what I find encouraging is that they still had some sort of a society. They still banded together and said, no, we're not gonna, the raiders are not okay. That group of just sort of, I guess, like thugs that just went about and robbing and killing and taking what wasn't theirs, that's not okay. We are still, you know, human. Yeah, for morale, we have to regulate this. They formed the regulators. And that is, I think, encouraging, even in the darkest of moments, that there was some disposition that we have to be good. We have to be better than the condition and the war that we are in. So that is Camp Sumter. There's so much more we could talk about, but we want to hear from you in the comment section below. Is this an atrocity of war that you had heard about before? Maybe you've been to Camp Sumter. There are some videos that I've seen online of people touring there. Let us know in the comment section below. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel, because we will be back with more Murder with Friends.